where we dive into the deeper narratives that shape who we are. I'm your host, Saima, and today's guest is Max Shippee, actor, gym owner, father, and now author of Moonshine, the series from rural Maine to Hollywood to Bali. Max has collected stories and insights along the way. Tonight, we explore the stories we are told, the stories we tell ourselves, and how even fictional tales, yes, even sci-fi adventures can hold truths that guide us on our spiritual path. This is about narrative, identity, and finding wisdom between the lines. Max, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Saima. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You're warmly welcome. Max, you have lived a pretty adventurous life, no doubt, from the woods of Maine to Hollywood. So, how have the stories, shaped you've heard along the way, shaped your own personal or spiritual journey?
Sure, that's a great question, and I'll have some questions for you as well. I love the I am not as educated as I should be in the
Mhm.
stories of India. I know I know the big stars Vishnu and things like that, and I've done enough through I've seen enough Bollywood to know a little bit about the stories that come out of India. But I would love to pick your brain as we go through this. It would be super fun.
Mhm.
But it's interesting. I grew up with a very my mother was a dance teacher. My dad was an eye doctor, so I kind of grew up with a story of being able to perform and what performing and being on stage and how to tell story through movement, through dance, through a lot of different ways to tell story through music, through movement, and then just through being on stage and doing plays and things like that. And realizing that there's a lot that can come across through story. Sometimes it can be just fun, often people just want to have an hour or two away of their lives and laugh and giggle a little bit. And sometimes people really appreciate being moved more by a story. But my own story was basically that anything is possible, that there were things to reach for. And I spent a good deal of my life reaching for those things. After school, after I went to college, I spent some time in Austin, Texas, and Las Vegas. And like it says there in my bio, I went to Indonesia for a little while, went to DC. Most of those places I was performing and finding a way to be on stage and be useful that way. And now that I'm in Los Angeles, I've had some pretty good success doing the actor thing. I did a lot of commercials. I was on an American soap opera for about 60 episodes or so, so had some good success there. And then once COVID hit,
Mhm.
I decided that it was time to do to kind of take an adventure into my own stories. And I'm sure some of your listeners can relate that I often will be going throughout my day and just think like, oh, that would make a great movie or that would make a great story. And, there's a million thoughts in my head every day of what would make a cool story. And finally, my wife harassed me enough. She's like, you should write some down. So started doing that. And this is the first chop at that is Moonshine, Path of the Raven. Yeah.
Hmm? So, what's there like particular story, like fictional or real, that cracks something open for you?
Oh, it's a great question. There's a lot of really good fiction and nonfiction that have helped me through that. Um, David Goggins is a great example. Actually, we'll start a little bit back. There's a great book by Stephen Pressfield called "The War of Art," and he kind of gives not the art of war, that's Sun Tzu, which is something different, but Stephen Pressfield wrote the War of Art, and that is about how to make progress in your life and how we all feel this resistance to doing the thing that we know we need to do. And I'm sure we can all relate to that. He, of course, is a writer, so he uses writing in his book as kind of the main example. But it can be anything from getting more fit to getting a raise to trying to be a good mom or dad. There's something in there that is it is a very interesting piece of resistance. Like when you know the right thing to do, but you still don't do it. Like why do we have that thing? And I'm sure some people have an easier time of that than others, but for me, for sure, there is that ever present, like, nah, I'll just do it later. So that book was very instrumental in just facing that resistance head on. His contention in the book is that where you feel that resistance is actually a compass of where you should be going. If you feel that resistance, that means that's where you should head. Like, oh, I don't feel like writing today. That's probably the thing that you should do. You're like, oh, I don't feel like going for a run today. I don't want to work out. That's
Mhm.
probably the thing that you should do. You know, like, ah, I don't want to finish the report for my boss. That is probably the thing that you should do. So, in one way, it's a resisting force. In another way, it's a great way to kind of point you in the direction that your life should probably be going. So, that was a really, really good book. Another book that very early on kind of affected me was a book called Ishmael by Dan Quinn. And he uses a fictional story and kind of an allegory to re-explore some of the some Bible teachings, which was very, very interesting to me. I'm no longer a traditional Christian, but I grew up that way in my small hometown. And that was kind of the first book that kind of blew the top off to say that like there's more to this than just the literal words. Like let's look at this in a little different way. So that kind of blew my brain open in a lot of ways. That was like, oh wait, I gotta look at this again in a different way. So I think that any book that can cause you to change your perspective on something is probably something that's really good for you. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, that insight that stories become mirrors feels so resonant for all of us.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. Those, and it's funny because you realize like any book that makes you rethink what your own stories are, even ones that you take for granted. Like that was about that book once again being brought up very Christian and kind of embracing that, and then having a bunch of assumptions that I didn't even realize I had that were running in the background. That then I was like, wait a second, I actually didn't even know that these stories were running in my head, and now I have to go back and look at them. So it was very, very, very interesting. And of course, the spiritual path is one that I feel like we're all on, even regardless of which spiritual path you're on. I think we're all wonderfully spiritual beings, and I honor all journeys. But it's is it who said the unexamined life is not worth living? And I think if we examine our life and examine those stories, we can actually learn a lot about ourselves. So yeah. But in addition to that, I can keep talking. Are you sick of me talking yet?
Yeah, sure, I would love to.
um, in addition to that, sometimes the fictional stories actually carry very deep truths. Like there's a reason why a lot of the world has seen Harry Potter, or a lot of the world has heard of Shakespeare, or those kind of stories. Those are English based. But there's a reason why certain fictional tales kind of survive over time, and it's because even if they're fiction, there's truth inside them. And I think that's a really, really fun way to explore story, is to say that, like, yes, the story is not true as in it happened, but there are truths in here that we can tease out. And I hope that's what my book does too.
That completely makes sense.
Yeah.
So, your latest series, Moonshine, is science fiction, right? So, what draws you to, tell stories through this genre, and how do you see it reflecting real truths about the human experience?
Sure. Great question. It's less sci-fi and more like fantasy, I would say. Sci-fi and fantasy are kind of next to each other on the bookshelf usually. But mine, I would say, is more fantasy. It's more magic based than sci-fi based. But what I'm hoping to do with it is to take kind of some very grounded magic systems and some very kind of universal um, um, magic, if you will, that are present in multiple cultures, and try to tie them together. And that's actually where the fun would be for me to ask you some questions today. In the book, there's witches and there's werewolves, and they kind of pair up together, not to give the book away or anything. But I know that werewolves are actually present in almost every single culture. They're present in Indian culture. They don't call them werewolves. Do you know what the name for them are?
Could you please repeat all four?
Sure, you actually have dogs barking in the background. That's funny. Um, is there a word for like a werewolf, like a wolf man in Hindi or an Indian culture? Like, is there what kind of legends are present in your culture for that?
Yeah, werewolf, like it's within a man, and it symbolizes someone cursed or infected to turn into a wolf-like monster during the full moon. Yeah.
Mhm. So that is present in your culture. Yes, that's great.
Yes.
Is he considered ferocious? Is he considered dangerous? Are they a good thing or a bad thing? Like, what is that?
Like, it's a metaphor, for rage or primal urges inside a seemingly normal person.
Right. Excellent. Is there a Is there a local name for it? Like, werewolf, we kind of borrowed that from the German culture, but is there a name for it in Hindi or in a local language?
Where no, it doesn't, it like in characters, they have certain names as characters. So
Ah.
yeah, there's no specific name as such.
Oh, no, like werewolf thing. You would just call it a wolf man. Is that what you call it? Probably.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, in the book, I've kind of matched up werewolves and witches. They kind of have a pairing and they help each other to be more powerful and contain their own, like the rage you talked about, or the very kind of the 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 feral or the ferocious aspects of it. The witches help the werewolves to kind of contain that, to be more productive. So that's really good to know that they are present in your culture as well. That's great. Do you know much about like local like folk magic in the Indian culture? Like, we would call them witches in the Celtic culture. Even here in the US, we also have voodoo culture, which is a little more kind of African American based. Are there specific things that witches have, like special powers that they're seen as having? Are they called witches? Are they called shamans? Is there something different in the Indian culture that's like that?
In Indian culture, the idea of folk magic, it definitely exists, but it has like its own traditional names and styles. Like there's in Hindi, it's called as totka,
Okay.
Totka,
Okay.
and
Totka.
those are referred, yes, totka, and those are referred to as like simple home remedies or small, magical acts for health, wealth, or warding off evil.
Right. Right. I gotcha. Yep. Is there
Then,
something deeper than that too,
mhm.
as well, or
And it's also called like, a broad term for magical practices, like for both good magic, which refers to as white magic, and even like harmful magic, which is like black magic.
right? Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of that. Of course, before modern medicine and that sort of thing, it was much more popular. But yeah, that's good to know. I'll do some research on that. Like, is there anything that you know of, like perhaps grandmothers or family that practice stuff? I know a lot of those too sometimes have to do with like love potions and things like that. But there's a lot in the European based or Celtic based. There's a lot of like lighting candles, making little altars, or making a tea or a tincture or something like that. I can imagine with the Indian spices the way they are, there must be some really cool mixtures and tinctures and things like that. Do you know about any?
Mm, it's about, the folk magic in Indian culture. It's not like practiced by like normal men
Okay.
or priests or gurus, but
Hmm.
it's like used for protection for some, like for healing, luck, love, or to fight bad energies. And it's
Okay.
very like old, rooted in villages, tribes, or local traditions as well.
Okay. Cool. Because that also fall does that overlap with Vedic medicine at all? Do you know?
No.
No, it doesn't. Because I know I have a family member actually who's very into Vedic medicine, and it's very interesting to learn how that and Chinese medicine both cross over. I get that there's no like it's not spiritual in the same way that like like what you're talking about, folk magic in that way. But sometimes you find out through folk magic that, oh, this tea is what we take to help when you have a cough, and then later they find out that one of the ingredients actually has a antihistamine or something in it. So that's why I'm asking about that.
And they're different. Like they sometimes they can overlap a little in practice, like in folk magic, their traditional rituals, charms, spells, and superstitions for protection, healing, luck, and like removing bad energies.
Mm,
But when it comes to like Ayurvedic medicine, it's like formal system of natural medicine based on balancing body
mm,
elements.
yeah. And even that is interesting if we're going to bring it back to like, the idea of story. The folk magic like it used to be is all story. If I put this kind of energy into something, if I can actually project my own story and make it become real. So in my book, hopefully some of that bleeds over as well. I'm asking you all these questions as well because I'm hoping in the next book or two to have a couple of characters that are from the Indian culture. I already have one that possibly could be. I gave him an Indian name, Or one that at least is very popular in India. So perhaps he's one of those pieces of culture already. But it's so I'm picking your brain. I'm taking advantage of this podcast to actually pick your brain a little bit. So thank you for letting me do that.
You're warmly welcome. So, is there a theme in Moonshine that you think directly speaks directly to spiritual growth?
I think it speaks to spiritual, not directly to any particular like spiritual group. If by spiritual, do you mean by spiritual group like Christian versus Hindi versus Muslim versus Jewish? Do you mean that type of thing, or do you mean an underlying current of some kind of spiritual message?
Oh, underlying like deeper spiritual message, not that Hindu, Muslims, or Christians.
Sure. I'm hoping that it actually does that. One of my hopes for the book is that it can actually embrace and show what a good and or positive example of both masculine and feminine could be. I know that that's a lot of challenge in our culture in the US. It's for sure something that's coming up. What does it mean to be divinely or positive masculine as well as divinely or positive feminine? Because both those things can be in conflict or they can be in complement to each other. And in this first book, I try to make sure that they're very complementary at first. But in the second and third books, we're going to see how they can also be very much in conflict. And that, of course, is not a new thing. I mean, Shakespeare did it. Many books and stories have played that masculine and feminine um, conflict up for sure. It's something that's not new for any of us, I'm sure. So I'm
Mhm.
hoping I'm hoping that spiritually it speaks to people in that way, as well as a journey of for Sam, our main character, his journey being one of improving himself or deciding who he's going to be and how he moves forward with that. Um, yeah, he has a very distinct journey that he chooses to be on, as well as a lot of us have experienced where something kind of falls in your lap and you have to make the best of it. And there's a little bit of that for sure as well. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the sneak peek. And that reflection that we are both author and character is such a powerful shift.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we for in at our best as humans, we are the author of our own book as we live our life, right? So like you said, like I was saying, these books hopefully aren't just fiction, but have some truths in them where we can take that from and apply it to our lives. I mean, that's what good stories do, right? Good stories enable us to talk with other people and be like, well, what would I do if I was that character? Or what did that character do that I really like?
Mm.
I really like that character. So I think that's what the most powerful stories can do.
I completely agree. So, has there been a moment when you had been like you had to challenge the dominant story being told around you?
Oh, sure. That has to do as much with myself and my own stories, I think, than anything else. When I started having a great example is having kids, because what you think you're going to be as a father, as a parent, and how you actually go about in practice to make what you want happen or how you want to bring up your kids happen can be very, very different. Um, I feel like my parents did the best that they could, and if I had to if I had to give my parents notes, we could all give our parents notes about how they could have been better, but they did the best they could. But hopefully, I've done even better for my kids too, because for sure there's a story about who you want to be to your kids, connected, inspiring, and all those things, and and how the actions you take are actually much more important than what you think you should be doing with the story you're telling in your head, like because the actions are the ones that speak most because everyone can see that. They can't see what you were thinking. They can't see what you thought you were going to do or wanted to actually say. It's what you actually do that's the most important. They say that a lot of times for kids, just being there. It actually doesn't matter what you're saying. It doesn't matter, if you're always patting them on the head, the fact that you're there means as much as anything else. So, having to learn those things early on in the parenting process, as well as how to be still a good husband with your wife, what does it mean to be both a husband and a father? Because those things sometimes overlap, sometimes they don't. So you have competing stories depending on where you are in the relationship and where you are with the kids. So those are things that I've had to examine and change as I move forward, for sure.
And that reminder that not all stories deserve to be believed is a freeing revelation.
Not all, not sorry. Repeat that one again. Not all stories.
That not all stories like deserve to be believed.
Oh yeah, that's true. We that's very true. Not all stories, and sometimes it's interesting you put it that way because sometimes a story will an internal story will serve us for a good long time. Before you get married, before you have kids, you have a story about who you
Hmm.
are as a normal single person that probably serves you pretty well. And then the next phase in life, that could be family, that could be, the story you tell yourself about the job you have currently, and then you get a better job. So you have to change your story. I think it's best actually often if the story changes first. And then so the things that are going on in your head can facilitate the actions that you take. And I would even go so far as to say that's probably the most healthy way for that to happen. To tell the story that I'm going to be a good manager. If you're just a normal job, but you're going to want to be a manager, like, oh, start telling myself the story of the manager that I'm going to be. And then it would naturally follow that you are then a good manager. And you could do the same thing from a single person to getting married, or even, telling myself that I'm going to be an author before I was, and the thing that made me the author, I had to tell myself a little bit of a story that if I write every day, then eventually I have a book, and then I'm an author. I'm an actual writer. Because whether or not you have a book or not, you can tell yourself you're a writer if you're writing every day, if the action follows. So yeah, but not all stories deserve, you know, time. I would say, you could tell yourself a very negative story about yourself and be like, wait a second, is that serving me? Is that getting me what I want? um so I would, yeah, that's a great thing to think about as well. Like, look around your life, look at the actions you're taking, and are they getting you where you want to be? And if they're not, like, there's probably a story in your head that you need to change. So yeah, that's what I would say is not, as you're saying, maybe not all stories should be believed or be given weight. And I think we can tell in our soul whether they should be, or given time. I mean, we could say that even in a more casual way. Sometimes you see a movie or read a book and you're like, oh yeah, that was really, really good. It really spoke.
Hmm.
And other times you could see a movie or read a book and be like, no, that was, I don't get it. I didn't like it, because it doesn't match up with your soul, if you want to put it that way, since this is kind of a soul podcast.
Absolutely. Max Shippee, he reminded us that stories aren't just entertainment, they're a framework for how we see ourselves and the world. Whether written in the stars or on the page, the stories we choose to believe can shape our entire journey. To all our listeners, here's your spark. Question the stories you have inherited. Rewrite the ones that you hold you back and lean into the ones that set your soul on fire.